I'm gonna go over 5 of my favorite rap albums that have come out this year. I'm gonna start out with By Storm, My Ghost Go Ghost. So when this album was announced, I hadn't listened to By the Time I Get to Phoenix, but I was aware of the band, I was aware of Injury Reserve, and I was aware of Grog's passing, and I was definitely curious of what the Reform duo was gonna make. I was very surprised by the album. It ended up having one of the most haunting tones of any rap album that I've ever heard, which perfectly reflected the themes of death throughout the project. The intro track immediately brings you into this dark world with this haunting guitar riff and these eerie auto-tune vocals in the background. It literally feels like you're being sucked into another world. And once the drums come in at the end of the 5-minute track, it feels so powerful. It's one of the most atmospheric and just haunting intro tracks that I've ever heard. Throughout the album, Richie maintained his unorthodox flows, and the production remained atmospheric and unpredictable all the way throughout. I noticed that towards the end, the album took a slightly more uplifting tone as opposed to the darker tone from the beginning, which eventually led to kind of a satisfying feeling closing track that feels like the end of a journey, I would say. To me, this structure feels like the journey through grief and loss of their friend and bandmate. The album starts off almost scary, I would say, but it strays away from that haunting vibe towards something that's not happy, but at least feels accepting, I would say. The final track still carries that somber tone, but it feels more like acceptance than loss. The very end of the album actually resonated with me, where the final song abruptly cut off. And to me, I think this represented the suddenness and the unpredictability of death. My favorite songs off the album were Can I Have You, For Myself, Grapefruit, In My Town, and Dead Weight. All of these songs just felt super atmospheric and hypnotic in their own way, and just fantastic songs overall. There weren't any songs on the album that I particularly disliked, but I felt as if the transition from the darker first 6 songs into the final 3 was slightly jarring. And I acknowledge that there's probably an artistic reason for this, but it just hasn't quite come to me yet. And before I get started with the next album, I just wanted to say that these are not in a particular order. My opinions on all of these have changed and shifted around over just the last 6 months since they've all been out, but I just thought I would note that.
There is no way that I feel this way, and I still ain't give an answer, no, you're losing.
So my second album I'm going to talk about is Slayer's Half-Blood, Bloodlux. So I heard of Slayer last year with the release of Half-Blood, and I loved a couple of his songs. I think Holding and Sloppy Joe. And so I went into the album thinking there might be a couple bangers. I didn't have crazy expectations, but it blew them out of the water. It ended up being one of, if not the best Rage project that I've ever heard, and possibly my album of the year. For me, it completely redefined the Rage genre by incorporating genre blending and kind of straying away from the idea that Rage has to be loud and aggressive and noisy. And I do think that type of music absolutely has its place, and I do listen to that kind of music sometimes, but I just think this just took it to the next level. He incorporated lots of EDM elements and rock elements as well sprinkled throughout. For me, the catchy synth melodies and the bouncy drums make this project more enjoyable to listen to than other Rage projects, and at the same time maintains the core idea of the genre, which is just hard-ass music, bass-driven, synth-driven. And I don't think people are talking about Slayer's voice on the album enough either. Although the production is arguably the best part, the album wouldn't be nearly as good if you took away Slayer's vocal melodies, in my opinion. Also, very notably, the transitions between all the songs are absolutely seamless, and it honestly just makes the album feel more like a full experience. My favorite songs on the album were Brain Fog, Love Blur, Holding, The Sky, and Eyesight. Brain Fog definitely being my favorite. My least favorite would have to be Wipe Your Nose and Never Go Down. I just thought they weren't as sonically interesting and honestly just kind of derivative. But outside of those two, incredible project. The third album I wanted to talk about is Red Star Wu and the Worldwide Scourge by Genesis Osuwu. I hadn't heard of him prior to this release, but going into it, I heard confident flows, heavy production, and beautiful softer moments that just made it a mind-blowing first album listening experience. In certain moments of the project, it reminded me of artists like Paris, Texas, Death Grips, Kid Cudi, and Kendrick Lamar at moments, but it did that without sounding derivative. Overall, this is one of the best blends of rock rap that I've ever heard, and he genre blends with more confidence than almost any other artist. Another thing to note is the political and social commentary that he gives throughout the album. There were so many incredible bars, and you could hear that he was talking about actual real-life relevant topics to today's society. And you can just look over the lyrics and you can immediately build a picture in your head, and you can link it to things that are actually happening in the world right now. At times, he might be getting a little bit too direct, but overall, I really like this aspect of the project. So where most albums that discuss real world issues fall flat for me is the replayability of the music. For example, I know I'm gonna get hate for this, but I almost never return to Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick because the songs just don't pull me back in. But with this project, Genesis combines his messages with his productions and flows, and they hit hard every time. And this is the main appeal for the album to me. My favorite songs were Pirate Radio, Stampede, The Worldwide Scourge, One for All, and For Life. For Life being one of the most gorgeous sounding songs that I've heard this year. My least favorite songs were probably Most Normal, American Voter, and Death Cold Zombie.
Tell me what you're missing, it's all I have, it's all I have, it's all I have. Tell me what you're missing, I can make it yours.
Alright, the fourth album I'm going to talk about is Terrified by Fake Mink. So going into this album, I had incredibly low expectations, but honestly it had some of the most replayable songs from this year. When it released and I saw the 19 song track list, I was fully expecting a lot of bloat, but I was honestly shocked to find myself engaged almost the entire project. Although it's not entirely a concept album in my opinion, because a lot of his lyrics aren't really reflecting the themes that I think he's trying to convey, I think it blended elements of a concept album and a track list filled with bangers in a way that felt natural and real to me. To me, the skits or the interludes actually had real emotional impact, and I haven't seen many other people saying that. I think that the skits are mainly trying to convey like a more abstract view of his life, but I haven't really taken the time to dissect them. These interludes aren't groundbreaking by any means, but the beautiful production mixed with the voice of the narrator just makes them super atmospheric in my opinion and pulls you into the stories he's trying to tell. The final track on the album, which is one of the skits, nearly brought me to tears, which is kind of insane because it's a fucking Fake Mink song, but in my opinion, it's one of the most gorgeous pieces of production that I've heard this year. The wobbly emotional synths and the narrator's words combined just to create a somber moment in this otherwise chaotic and hard-hitting album. The narrator's point was conveyed in the line, "Every morning arrives like a very patient waiter." And although it's not a groundbreaking point by any means, the story that the narrator tells before this just makes it hit so hard and just, I don't know, it made me think about what she was saying in a way that I hadn't before. Overall, I don't think the hate for this album is justified at all. I think it stemmed from a few things. Fake Mink's ego prior to the release, his vocal chain, and the lack of innovation on the project. So obviously I don't think this was a groundbreaking project as Fake Mink claimed that it would be, but I don't think that takes away from the experience of the album. While it wasn't some grand conceptual masterpiece, I think there were so many great moments throughout the track list. I understand the dislike for the B vocal chain, but after getting used to it, wasn't a big issue for me. One of the biggest strengths was the synths, and they stood out a lot, and I feel like they complemented Fakeming's gritty, buzzy vocal chain that he used throughout the project. He also had many standout flows, like on Tell Me What You're Missing or Kiss of Death. For me, Fakeming really demonstrated how far simplicity can go with this project. It's not reinventing the wheel by any means, but it works for me. My favorite songs on the album were Tell Me What You're Missing, Kiss of Death, Forget Me Not, and Etna. My least favorite songs were Creep and Rewind. They just didn't stand out to me as much as the other songs on the project. The final album I want to talk about is Sulphur Surfer by Blade. Blade is one of my favorite artists of all time, so I am a little bit biased. I don't think that it was his best project overall, but it definitely was a thought-provoking and sonically interesting listening experience, even compared to his previous projects. To me, I immediately noticed it kind of sounded like a sequel to Spider, but I don't think it necessarily takes away from the project. As a producer myself, the White Armor production blew my mind. He combines these gritty synths and drums, and they remind me of a blend between like Spider and Cold Visions, but with these beautiful melodies almost similar to like Crest. The production is so deep and layered that you can almost always hear something that you hadn't previously noticed. For me, the more folk-centered sections add a lot to the listening experience in my opinion as well. Paired with his like mythological themes that he explores throughout the project, I think it makes the project actually feel like some sort of like quest. As I mentioned just now, his lyrics on the project were also super interesting to me. He explores religious and mythological themes, and though I haven't dived super deep into the concept, the lyrics are just so interesting to me and just thought-provoking overall. His use of abstract imagery pairs with the unorthodox production of the project, and it just works super well altogether. My favorite songs on the project were The Dark Mirror, Fox and Birch, Versailles Flow, Sulphur Surfer, and my least favorite song would probably be Highland Tyrant, which just, I feel like doesn't fully click for me. And that makes up my 5 favorite albums that have come out so far in 2026.